The Galactic Council's ultimatum arrived without warning. Ambassador Lisa Grant stood in the command center of humanity's Mars orbital station, reading the decoded message for the third time. Her hands trembled despite years of diplomatic training. The Council demanded Earth surrender its military fleet, dismantle all defensive platforms, and submit to permanent monitoring. They gave humanity 72 hours to comply. Captain Jake Morrison entered the room, his uniform crisp despite the emergency jaw call that had pulled him from sleep. He noticed Lisa's pale face immediately. She handed him the tablet without a word. His jaw tightened as he scrolled through the demands. The Council spoke of peace, but their terms read like a prison sentence. Humanity would become a protectorate, stripped of autonomy. Every ship monitored. Every colony inspected. Every technological advancement reviewed and approved by alien bureaucrats who had never set foot on human soil. Jake looked at the star map dominating the wall. Red markers showed Council fleet positions. They surrounded human space like a noose. 47 warships, each one capable of glassing a planet. The Council had positioned them weeks ago, long before sending their ultimatum. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender demand backed by overwhelming force. Lisa's voice cracked as she spoke. They're calling it the Peace Preservation Act. They say we're too aggressive, too unpredictable. Our expansion into the outer colonies violated unwritten protocols. They claim we're a threat to galactic stability. Jake knew the real reason. Humanity had discovered faster-than-light communication 6 months ago. The breakthrough terrified the Council. For 3,000 years, they had controlled all FTL technology. They decided which species could explore, which could trade, which could thrive. Humanity's independent discovery shattered their monopoly on power. The other Council races had followed the rules. The Ventari had waited centuries for FTL approval. The Korathi had abandoned entire research programs when the Council frowned. Species learned to be patient, to be grateful for whatever scraps of technology the Council allowed them to have. Humanity had never been good at patience. Jake pulled up Earth's response draft. The diplomatic corps had spent hours crafting it, every word measured and careful. It was a masterpiece of political language that said absolutely nothing. It bought time while saying maybe. Jake deleted it with a single keystroke. Lisa gasped. "What are you doing? Telling them the truth?" Jake started typing. His message was simple. Humanity rejected the ultimatum. Earth would not surrender its sovereignty. If the Council wanted war, they would get one. Lisa grabbed his arm. "You can't send that. You'll doom us all. We can't win against 47 warships." Jake met her eyes. "We can't win as slaves either. Maybe we lose. Maybe they burn every human world to ash. But we go down fighting, and every species in the galaxy will see that someone finally said no to the Council." He hit send before she could stop him. Across human space, alarms began to sound. Fleet commanders received their orders. Colony defense grids powered up. Mining stations converted to weapons platforms. Civilian ships evacuated core worlds while military vessels formed battle lines. Humanity had 71 hours left. The Council's response came within minutes. Shock and outrage filled every line. They had expected compliance. For 3,000 years, every species had complied. The message ended with a simple statement that made Lisa's blood run cold. The Council fleet was advancing. Humanity's defiance would be corrected with force. Jake watched the red markers on the star map begin to move. They converged on human space from 3 directions, a carefully planned encirclement. He activated the station-wide comm. His voice carried to every human listening in orbit and on the surface of Mars below. The war had begun not because humanity sought it, but because they refused to kneel. The Council had gone too far. Now they would learn what happened when you backed humans into a corner. They would learn that some species would rather die free than live as subjects. The first shots would fire in 68 hours. Jake intended to make every single one count. Admiral Kevin Brooks commanded humanity's largest battle group from the bridge of the Defiant. 32 ships, humanity's entire deep space fleet. Against the Council's forces, it was a joke. Against their arrogance, it might be enough. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Amy Chen, highlighted the approaching Council formation. The enemy moved with textbook precision, 3 prongs designed to split human defenses and conquer each colony in sequence. The Ventari commanded the left flank with their plasma frigates. The Korathi took the right with their shield dreadnoughts. The center belonged to the Takari, the Council's oldest members, whose ships had enforced their will for millennia. Kevin had studied every recorded council battle. They followed doctrine like scripture, never deviating, never adapting. Their victories came from overwhelming force applied according to ancient tactical manuals. They had never needed to innovate because they had never faced real resistance. He smiled grimly. Humanity had been at war with itself for most of its history. Every conflict had taught lessons written in blood. Humans knew how to fight when outgunned. They knew how to make the enemy pay for every inch of ground. The Council's lead ship opened a channel. The Takari Admiral appeared on screen, his scaled face arranged in what might have been contempt. He spoke in perfectly translated English, his tone dripping with condescension. "Human Commander, you are ordered to stand down. Your fleet will be boarded and dismantled. Your crews will be detained pending Council judgment. Resistance will result in your immediate destruction. You have one opportunity to surrender with honor." Kevin leaned back in his command chair. "Define honor for me, Admiral. Is it the honor of invading sovereign space, the honor of demanding surrender at gunpoint, or the honor of threatening genocide against civilians?" The Takari's eyes narrowed. "We offer you peace. We offer you safety under Council protection. Your species is young and reckless. We act to preserve galactic order. You act to preserve your power," Kevin replied. "You're terrified that humanity developed FTL communications without your permission. You're afraid other species will see what we did and realize they don't need your protection. They don't need your rules. They just need the courage to tell you no." The alien admiral's facade cracked. Anger flashed across his features. "Your courage is indistinguishable from stupidity. You have 30 ships. We have 47. Your technology is centuries behind ours. This battle ends only one way." Kevin checked his tactical display. The Council fleet was entering weapons range, still maintaining their perfect formation, exactly as he had hoped. "You're right about one thing, Admiral. This battle does end only one way, but I don't think you're going to like it. Humans have a saying, don't mistake kindness for weakness." He cut the transmission and turned to Amy. "All ships, execute Broken Arrow Protocol. Let's show them what crazy looks like." The Defiant's engines flared to maximum burn. The entire human fleet accelerated directly at the Council's center formation, abandoning any pretense of defensive positioning. It was suicide by every conventional tactical analysis. The Council ships opened fire, confident in their victory. They didn't know about the modifications. For 6 months, while humanity had pretended to debate the Council's concerns, every warship had been upgraded. Human engineers had reverse-engineered captured Council shield technology and improved it. They had miniaturized antimatter reactors to triple power output. They had created weapons the Council had never imagined because their doctrine didn't permit innovation. The first Council volleys struck the Defiant's shields and scattered. Enhanced deflectors held against twice their rated capacity. Kevin watched enemy fire splash harmlessly across his fleet while human return fire punched through Takari's shields like they weren't there. Railguns launched tungsten slugs at .3 light speed. Missiles carried shaped nuclear charges designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in Council armor. And the new weapons, the ones humanity had kept secret, began to fire. Electromagnetic pulse mines deployed in the path of the Council advance. When they detonated, entire sections of the enemy formation went dark, their shields collapsing, their weapons offline. The Takari Admiral screamed orders, trying to restore organization. But his ships couldn't respond. Their computer systems were rebooting, a process that would take precious minutes. Minutes humanity used to devastating effect. The Defiant and her escorts tore into the disabled ships like wolves among sheep. Kevin felt no satisfaction in the slaughter, only grim necessity. The Council had demanded surrender. They had threatened extinction. Now they would learn that threatening humanity carried consequences. The Ventari flank tried to wheel around and support the collapsing center, but they ran into a minefield humanity had seeded weeks ago. Explosions rippled through their formation. Ships stumbled out of control, their engines shattered. The Cordy fared no better. Human submarines, small, fast-attack craft that had been hiding in the debris field of an old colony, emerged behind the Council's right flank and opened fire at point-blank range. In 20 minutes, the Council lost 15 ships. Not damaged, not disabled. Destroyed. Crews dead. Hulls torn apart. The carefully planned encirclement became a disaster. The surviving Council vessels broke formation and retreated, their admiral's voice hoarse with disbelief as he demanded reinforcements. Kevin didn't pursue. He'd made his point. Human losses stood at 3 ships damaged, 0 destroyed. The butcher's bill could have been worse, would be worse in future engagements. But today, humanity had proven they could fight. He opened a general broadcast on all council frequencies. Every ship within 20 light-years would hear him. Every species that had knuckled under to council authority for centuries would receive his message. This is Admiral Kevin Brooks of the human fleet. We did not want this war. We sought only to exist as free people. The council chose violence over negotiation. They chose ultimatums over diplomacy. Today they learned that humanity will not be bullied. We will not surrender our sovereignty. We will not accept occupation. Any council ship that enters human space will be treated as hostile and destroyed. This war continues until the council recognizes our right to exist as equals, not subjects. To any species listening, know this. The council can be beaten. Their ships can burn. Their admirals can fail. You don't have to accept their rule. You just have to be willing to fight for your freedom. Humanity stands ready to help any who dare to stand with us. He ended the transmission and surveyed the battlefield. Wreckage drifted in the void. Cooling metal and frozen atmosphere marking where proud council warships had died. It was a terrible sight. It was also necessary. The council would regroup. It would bring more ships, better tactics. But they would never again assume humanity would simply comply. Amy pulled up intelligence reports flooding in from across the galaxy. The battle had been broadcast on public channels. Billions had watched, and in the aftermath, something unprecedented was happening. The subject species, the ones who had lived under council control for generations, were asking questions, demanding answers. Some were even beginning to organize. Kevin felt the weight of what he'd started. Humanity had walked away from peace, not because they wanted war, but because the peace offered was no peace at all. It was submission. It was slavery dressed in diplomatic language. The council had gone too far. Now the galaxy would see what happened when they pushed too hard. Revolution was coming, and humanity had lit the fuse. The council convened an emergency session 6 hours after their defeat. The chamber on Nexus Prime, capital world of galactic governance, had stood for 5,000 years. Today, its walls echoed with unprecedented chaos. The Takari representative demanded immediate retaliation. The Ventari counseled caution. The Korathi, humiliated by the ambush that had savaged their fleet, called for total war against humanity. High Chancellor Verix, a Takari elder whose scales had dulled to gray with age, struggled to maintain order. He had led the council for 2 centuries, guiding policy with careful deliberation. Nothing in his experience prepared him for this moment. A subject species had not merely resisted, they had won. Intelligence reports covered every surface in the chamber. Analysts had dissected the battle frame by frame. The humans had employed tactics the council had never encountered. Worse, they had demonstrated technology that shouldn't exist. The electromagnetic pulse weapons violated the technological limitation accords. The enhanced shields exceeded permitted specifications. The railgun velocities surpassed safety regulations. Regulations humanity had never signed. Verix finally realized the depth of their miscalculation. Humanity had never been part of the council system. They had developed independently, rediscovering technologies in ways that bypassed council control. When they made first contact 12 years ago, the council assumed they would naturally accept the existing order. Every species did. It was simply how the galaxy worked. Except humanity didn't care how things had always worked. They cared only about how things should work. The distinction was proving catastrophic. A junior analyst, a young Ventari named Soren, presented findings that made the chamber fall silent. The battle broadcast had reached 47 civilizations within council space. Of those, 30. One showed increased communication traffic between dissident groups. Protests had erupted on 7 worlds. On Korathi Prime itself, citizens were demanding to know why their military had been defeated so easily. Worse still, 3 species had formally requested information about human FTL communication technology. Not through official channels. Through underground networks the council had believed dismantled decades ago. The infrastructure of rebellion still existed, dormant but not dead, waiting for a spark. Humanity had provided that spark. Verix called for silence. His voice carried the weight of his position, but also a weariness that surprised many in the chamber. He spoke carefully, aware that his words would define the council's response. We underestimated them. We assumed technological parity would ensure cooperation. We believed our superior numbers guaranteed victory. We were wrong on both counts. The question before us now is not whether we can defeat humanity. Given sufficient resources, we certainly can. The question is what such a defeat would cost, and whether that cost is acceptable. The Corathi representative, Admiral Thane, slammed his appendage against the podium. Acceptable? They destroyed 15 ships, killed thousands, broadcast their defiance across the galaxy. We cannot allow such insolence to stand. Every subject race will see weakness if we negotiate. They already see weakness, Soren interrupted, his voice quiet but clear. They watched our fleet retreat. They saw our tactics fail. They witnessed our ships burn. Military action isn't our only option. It may not even be our best option. Varix gestured for the analyst to continue. Soren pulled up data streams showing economic indicators across Council space. Trade efficiency has dropped 18% since the battle. Ship captains are refusing routes near human territory. Insurance rates have tripled for any vessel operating in contested zones. More significantly, the Underground Railroad, what we thought was a historical curiosity, has reactivated. They're offering to transport dissidents to human space. Offering asylum! The chamber erupted again. The Underground Railroad was a legend. A network that had supposedly helped persecuted individuals escape council jurisdiction centuries ago. Most had assumed it was propaganda, a story to frighten governments. If it was real and active again, the implications were staggering. Varix raised his hand for silence. How is humanity responding to these asylum requests? Soren met his gaze steadily. They're accepting everyone. No questions asked, no loyalty oaths required. They're providing sanctuary on their colony worlds. They've even assigned ships to protect refugee convoys. In the past 6 hours, an estimated 12,000 individuals from 9 different species have fled to human protection. The council representatives processed this information with growing alarm. Humanity wasn't just fighting. They were offering an alternative. They were building a coalition not through force but through freedom. Every refugee they accepted was a statement. Every life they protected was propaganda more effective than any weapon. Admiral Thane saw the danger clearly. If we allow this to continue, we lose control, not through military defeat, but through mass exodus. Species will leave voluntarily. The council becomes irrelevant. Then we must destroy them quickly, another representative argued. Mobilize the full fleet, 500 ships. Glass their worlds. Make an example so terrible that no one dares follow their path. Varix considered the proposal. 500 ships would certainly win. Humanity couldn't stand against such force. But what came after? The refugees would become martyrs. The survivors would scatter across the galaxy, spreading their ideas like seeds, and every species would know the Council maintained power through genocide. The alternative was equally unpalatable. Negotiate with humans as equals. Recognize their sovereignty. Admit that the Council's authority was not absolute. Such a precedent would shatter the foundation of galactic governance. Other species would demand the same treatment. The carefully constructed hierarchy would collapse. Varix had spent 2 centuries preserving that hierarchy. He believed in it. The Council had brought order to chaos, peace to a galaxy that had once burned with constant warfare. Their methods were harsh but necessary. Their control was absolute, but just, or so he had always told himself. Looking at the data now, at the protests and the exodus and the growing rebellion, he wondered if he had been lying all along. A message arrived from the human admiral, Kevin Brooks. It was addressed personally to Varix, bypassing all official channels. The High Chancellor opened it with trembling hands. The message was brief. You can still choose peace. Real peace, not submission, not occupation. Partnership between equals. Humanity will fight if we must, but we'd prefer to build. The galaxy is large enough for all of us. The question is whether you're wise enough to see that before more lives are lost. Varix stared at the words for a long time. Around him, the council debated mobilization plans and strike coordinates. They spoke of honor and authority and the necessity of maintaining order. They sounded confident, certain of their righteousness. But Varix heard desperation in their voices. They weren't discussing how to win. They were discussing how to avoid admitting they had already lost. The moment humanity had survived that first battle had broadcast their victory across the galaxy, the old order had ended. What replaced it would be determined in the coming days, but there was no going back to how things were. He thought about his grandchildren, young Takari who would inherit whatever galaxy emerged from this crisis. Did he want them to grow up in a council maintained by fear and genocide? Or in a galaxy where species worked together because they chose to, not because they had no other option? The choice should have been simple. Somehow it was the hardest decision of his long life. Varric stood and called for a vote. The chamber fell silent. The motion was unprecedented. Should the council negotiate with humanity as equals, or prosecute total war? The vote would determine the fate of trillions. It would define whether the galaxy moved toward cooperation or conflict. And as representatives began casting their choices, Varric realized that, regardless of outcome, humanity had already won something crucial. They had forced the question. They had made the council justify its authority instead of simply wielding it. That alone was revolutionary. The defense grid around Earth's moon hummed with activity. Director Paul Martinez watched the sensor feeds from Luna Command, his eyes tracking hundreds of civilian vessels evacuating toward the outer colonies. 6 million people had already fled. Another 10 million waited for transport. The council's ultimatum had passed 50 hours ago. 22 hours remained before their deadline expired. Paul's second-in-command, Commander Rita Hayes, highlighted a new contact entering the lunar defense zone. It wasn't broadcasting any identification, but its trajectory suggested it came from deep space. From Council territory. Could be a scout, Rita suggested. Advance reconnaissance before the main assault. Paul didn't think so. Scouts traveled in groups, and this ship was alone. He ordered the lunar defense platforms to track but not engage. The vessel approached Earth at subliminal speeds, making no effort to hide or evade. Its hull configuration didn't match any Council military design. When it finally responded to hails, the voice on the other end spoke broken English with a Ventari accent. Please, we seek sanctuary. We are refugees. 23 families. We have children. We heard humans offer protection. Paul authorized an escort to guide the ship to a secure docking bay. It was the first of many. Over the next 4 hours, 17 more vessels arrived. Korathi merchants, Takari scientists, even a few Ventari military officers who had deserted rather than participate in the coming assault. They all told similar stories. They had watched the battle. They had seen humans refuse to surrender. It gave them courage to refuse as well. Rita processed the arrivals, assigning temporary housing and conducting security screenings. Most of the refugees had nothing but the clothes they wore and whatever belongings fit in emergency packs. They had abandoned homes, careers, entire lives to flee here. To Earth, to humanity. What do we do with them? Rita asked quietly. We're preparing for war. We don't have resources to shelter thousands of refugees. Paul understood her concern. Earth's defenses needed every ounce of power, every spare credit, every available person working to prepare for the Council's assault. Taking in refugees stretched already thin resources, but he also understood what these people represented. They were proof that humanity's stand mattered beyond simple survival. They were the future if humanity won. We shelter them, Paul said firmly. We protect them. That's what we're fighting for, isn't it? The right to live free. That right doesn't just apply to humans. We help these people because it's the right thing to do, and because every person we save is another voice that can tell the truth about the Council. He drafted a message to all Earth governments, requesting emergency funding and resources for refugee support. The response came within minutes. Every nation on Earth approved the measure unanimously. It was possibly the first time in human history that every government agreed on anything without debate. The refugees would be cared for. Among the arrivals was a Ventari engineer named Cora. She requested an immediate meeting with Human Military Command. Paul granted it, curious what could be so urgent. Cora arrived at his office escorted by 2 security officers. Her feathers ruffled with agitation. I worked on Council fleet maintenance, she began without preamble. I know their systems. I know their weaknesses. I want to help you fight them. Paul leaned forward, interested. Why betray your own people? They stopped being my people the moment they ordered genocide, Cora replied, her translator struggling with her emphatic tone. The Council plans to glass your worlds, not defeat you, not occupy you. Exterminate you. I heard the orders. I saw the weapon configurations. They're loading planet killers. Planet killers were forbidden by every galactic treaty. They were weapons of last resort, designed to shatter worlds, not conquer them. If the Council was deploying them, they had abandoned any pretense of bringing humanity into their fold. This was annihilation. How long do we have? Paul asked. The Council fleet mobilizes in 18 hours. They'll arrive in human space within 72 hours of departure. The public deadline was a distraction. They never intended to negotiate. Paul immediately sent the intelligence to Admiral Brooks in the human fleet. If true, it changed everything. Humanity had been preparing for a battle of conquest. Now they faced extinction. The defensive strategies were inadequate. They needed to strike first, strike hard, and strike where the Council least expected it. Cora provided detailed specifications for Council shipyards, supply depots, and command centers. She outlined security protocols and identified vulnerabilities in their logistics network. Most importantly, she gave Paul the access codes to the Council's military communication grid. "You can't win a direct battle," Cora explained. "They have too many ships. But you can hurt them. You can make them pay such a high cost that they question whether destroying humanity is worth it. Hit their infrastructure. Destroy their ability to wage war. Make them choose between pursuing genocide and protecting their own worlds." Rita voiced the concern they were all thinking. "That makes us terrorists. We'd be attacking civilian targets." "I'm suggesting military targets," Cora corrected. "Shipyards are military. Supply depots are military. Command centers are military. Yes, some civilian workers will be there. Some will die. War is terrible. The question is whether you want to fight it on your terms or theirs." Paul hated the logic, but he couldn't dispute it. Earth's defenses could buy time, but not victory. If humanity waited for the Council to bring the war to human space, they would lose. The only chance was to force the Council to defend multiple fronts, to spread their forces thin, to make them fear for their own security. It meant becoming the aggressor. It meant crossing lines humanity had tried to avoid. It meant accepting that survival sometimes required terrible choices. He approved Cora's plan and forwarded it to military command with his endorsement. Within the hour, Admiral Brooks confirmed receipt and began reassigning ships for deep strike missions. Humanity would hit the Council where they lived, make them bleed in their own space, and prove that threatening Earth carried unacceptable consequences. As Paul watched the refugee ships continue to arrive, he reflected on the irony. Humanity had walked away from peace to preserve their freedom. Now they were walking toward war to defend the freedom of others. The path was darker than anyone had hoped, but it was the only path that didn't end in chains or death. 20 hours until the deadline. 20 hours to prepare for humanity's first offensive strike in a galactic war. Paul didn't pray often, but he prayed now, not for victory. Victory might be impossible. He prayed that when this war ended, whoever survived would remember why it had been fought. He prayed that freedom would mean something to the next generation, and that they would guard it more carefully than his generation had. The refugees in the docking bay were settling in, children crying, parents comforting them, all of them terrified but hopeful. They had bet their lives that humanity would protect them. Paul intended to make sure that bet paid off, whatever the cost. The Council fleet assembled at Staging Point Theta 9, a massive military station on the edge of Council core territory. 500 ships, the largest armada in recorded history. Their hulls gleamed in the light of 3 suns, weapons charged, crews ready. High Chancellor Varix watched from the observation deck of the command carrier, his heart heavy despite the impressive display of power. The vote had been close. Negotiate or annihilate. The chamber had nearly split evenly. In the end, the warmongers had won by a margin of just 8 votes. Varix had cast his vote for negotiation, but he was in the minority. The Council had chosen genocide. Admiral Fane commanded the fleet from the bridge of the Absolute, the Council's largest dreadnought. He had planned this campaign personally, studying human tactics from the previous battle. This time, there would be no surprises. The fleet would jump into human space simultaneously at 15 different points, overwhelming any defense Earth could muster. The planet killers would target Earth, Mars, and the 3 largest colony worlds. Within hours, humanity would cease to exist. Thane felt no remorse. Humanity had been given a choice. They had chosen defiance. Now they would face the consequences. The galaxy would see what happened to species who rejected Council authority. Order would be maintained, even if it required the extinction of an entire race. The fleet prepared to jump. Crews ran final checks. Weapon systems powered to combat readiness. Navigation computers calculated precise jump coordinates to put them in optimal attack position. In 15 minutes, the assault would begin. Then, every alarm on every ship began screaming at once. The first explosion tore through the Venturi shipyard complex, 3 light-years from the staging point. Antimatter charges planted by human saboteurs detonated simultaneously, destroying half-completed ships still in construction. The blast was visible from the command carrier, a flash of light that briefly outshone the nearest sun. Seconds later, reports flooded in from across Council space. The Cordy military depot at Helios Station was under attack by human strike craft. The Takari command center on Nexus Prime had gone offline. Communications severed. Supply convoys heading to support the fleet were being intercepted and destroyed by small, fast human vessels that appeared, struck, and vanished before defenders could respond. Humanity had struck first, and they had struck everywhere. Admiral Thaney stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Red warning indicators appeared across the map like a disease spreading. 37 facilities under attack, 15 already destroyed. The carefully planned assault was collapsing before it even began. His fleet was powerful, but it was here, at the staging point. The attacks were happening across thousands of light years of space, too, dispersed to counter effectively. How? Thane demanded. How did they penetrate our security? How did they coordinate this? His intelligence officer pulled up intercepted communications. Human forces were using the Council's own military network, broadcasting on encrypted channels that should have been inaccessible. They knew the security protocols. They knew where to hit and when to hit it. Someone had given them the keys to the entire Council military infrastructure. A traitor, a refugee who had fled to human protection and sold out their own people. Thane felt rage building. The Council had taken in countless species, uplifted them, protected them, and this was their gratitude. Betrayal. Varix arrived on the bridge, his old scales showing every one of his years. He had predicted this. Not the specifics, but the concept. Push species too hard and they push back. Trust nothing but force, and eventually force becomes the only language anyone speaks. The Council had created this situation through decades of oppression masquerading as order. Recall the fleet, Varix ordered quietly. Thaney spun to face him. What? No, we proceed as planned. We destroy humanity and hunt down every traitor who helped them. We show the galaxy what defiance costs. We show the galaxy that we're vulnerable, Varix countered. Every species is watching. They see our shipyards burning. They see our supply lines severed. They see that the Council can be hurt. If we proceed with this assault while our infrastructure crumbles, we look desperate. We look weak. The truth of it hit Thane hard. The fleet could still glass human worlds. Planet killers didn't care about sabotage or supply lines, but the victory would be Pyrrhic. The Council would have committed genocide while their own territory burned. The subject species would see opportunity in that weakness. Revolution would spread like wildfire. Another report arrived. Human forces had destroyed the antimatter refinery at Kepler Station. That facility produced fuel for half the Council fleet. Without it, long-range operations would become impossible within weeks. The humans weren't just attacking random targets. They were systematically dismantling the Council's ability to wage war. Varix had to admit a grudging respect for the strategy. Humanity couldn't win a straight fight, so they changed the nature of the fight. They made it about endurance, about cost-benefit analysis. Every Council facility destroyed was credits lost, resources wasted, time consumed on defense instead of offense. How many shipyards could the Council afford to lose? How many supply depots? How many workers? At what point did destroying humanity cost more than accepting their existence? The communication console chimed with an incoming transmission. Admiral Brooks, broadcasting from somewhere in Council space. His face calm, but his eyes hard. Chancellor Varix, I assume you're receiving this. I'm speaking to you specifically because I believe you understand what's at stake. Varix gestured for the transmission to be shown on the main view screen. Brooks continued. My fleet is currently positioned near Korathi Prime. We have no interest in harming civilians. But we're prepared to target military installations if your assault on Earth proceeds. We can hit 12 more facilities in the next hour. 24 the hour after that. We can keep this up for weeks if necessary. Thane started to speak, but Varix silenced him with a gesture. Brooks wasn't finished. Here's what I'm offering. A ceasefire. Immediate cessation of hostilities. We return to our space. You return to yours. We establish a neutral zone and begin actual negotiations. Not ultimatums. Not surrender demands. Please. Real talks between equals about how we coexist in this galaxy. We can build something better than this endless cycle of threat and counter-threat. Brooks paused, his expression softening slightly. I know there are costs to peace. The Council will have to recognize our sovereignty. Other species will demand the same recognition. Your authority will be challenged. I understand why that's frightening. But the alternative is worse. We can all burn together, or we can all build together. Those are the only two options. Choose wisely. The transmission ended, leaving silence on the bridge. 500 warships waited for orders. Across Council space, fires burned at 37 sites. On Earth, humanity prepared for annihilation, hoping their gambit would work but ready to die if it didn't. Varix looked at the tactical display one more time. He thought about his grandchildren, about the galaxy he wanted them to inherit. He thought about the 5,000 years of Council rule, the peace they had maintained, the order they had enforced. He thought about the price of that order and whether it had ever truly been worth paying. Then he gave the order that would change galactic history. Recall the fleet. All ships return to Council space. Secure our facilities and await further orders. Send a message to Admiral Brooks. We accept his ceasefire. We will negotiate. Admiral Thane protested. Other representatives shouted in outrage, but Varix didn't waver. Humanity had forced the Council to a crossroads. They had made continuation of war unacceptable by making the costs too high. They had walked away from peace on the Council's terms and forced the Council to consider peace on different terms. The galaxy held its breath. The largest military fleet ever assembled began to stand down. Human strike forces ceased their attacks, withdrawing to defensive positions. And in the void between Council space and human territory, a neutral zone was designated where negotiators would meet. Humanity had fought their war not to conquer, but to earn the right to negotiate. They had proven they couldn't be intimidated and couldn't be easily destroyed. Now came the harder part, building a peace that both sides could accept, creating a new order that didn't rely on domination, and proving to a watching galaxy that cooperation was possible between equals. The Council had gone too far. Humanity had walked away from false peace. Now, perhaps, they could all walk toward something real. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time in 5,000 years, it was genuinely open. What came next would depend on whether the wounds cut too deep to heal, or whether wisdom could emerge from the ashes of near destruction. On Earth, in Council chambers and refugee camps scattered across both territories, trillions of beings waited to see if the galaxy's oldest empire and its newest free species could find common ground. The war had ended not with surrender, but with exhaustion. The peace that followed would be built not on trust, but on necessity. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what anyone had wanted, but it was a chance, and sometimes a chance was all that anyone could hope for.